we had this tremendous success in reducing chronic homelessness was New Hope. There was Pastor Rudy in Temenos.
Absolutely.
And not much else.
We all need an affordable place to live. You can't hope to have a single-family home if you don't have an affordable place to rent so you can save money for a down payment. Haven't we as Americans come to realize the value of affordable housing? You never used to hear it mentioned on the national stage.
Nobody really thinks about, I'm going to go into affordable housing development. There are cool opportunities in this field.
Cities that have the least affordable housing have the most homelessness. 50% of the people in our city rent the place where they live. I'm driving down the freeway. I think every other car is someone who rents, and every fourth car is a Houstonian who's rent burdened.
Describe in plain English what rent burdened is.
Yes, it means that.
Welcome to Affordable Houser, where we talk to the people who make affordable housing happen. This is the second episode in a series we're doing on reducing homelessness in Houston. Houston has been one of the leading cities in the country at doing great work in reducing homelessness, and we have some really great organizations and great people that have been a part of that effort. So we're going to talk to some of those people in this series, people who are key parts of the team that helped decrease homelessness in Houston and initiated some of the best practices that evolved here that we hope can be replicated in other communities. So this week, I'm really glad to welcome to the program Joy Horak-Brown. Joy is president and CEO of New Hope Housing. She has done fabulous work in Houston. She was their first employee back in 1993. And through her leadership, the organization has grown from a small one running about 40 units to now having over 1,500 apartment homes in 11 different affordable communities across Houston. Joy has been instrumental in providing affordable housing in our city and some of the most beautiful and architecturally, aesthetically wonderful properties that I've seen in all the PSH housing that I've looked at in various communities around the country. So she's doing incredible work. What else would you like to share about yourself by way of introduction, Joy?
Well, it's wonderful to be here, and thank you so much for inviting me. And indeed, I was New Hope's first employee, but it's important to note that I was part-time. So I was part-time for the first 2 or 3 years. It was 1999 when I became full-time, and we had grown then to maybe one other employee and a consultant. And today we're 135 strong. We certainly use still many consultants to supplement the staff that we have. We do, as you said, have 11 buildings operating and 4 under construction. And that just astonishes me, Neal, that we've grown to that point, because typically over the arc of New Hope's history, we've had 1 building under construction, perhaps 1 just finishing up and another 1 beginning, but 4 at once, almost $200 million in development. I have to pinch myself that we got here, and thanks to the support of so many in the community.
In doing a little bit of my research on New Hope, even though I've been intimately familiar with the great work you've been doing for years, I learned that you've assisted over 13,000 people and that you've raised over $285 million in layered debt-free financing of various kinds. That's pretty remarkable.
Well, it's remarkable as far as I'm concerned. The person who started out part-time, I can remember when I spent a great deal of time on donors whose gifts were very small, and I still do. That's one of the things to know that's important about us is we started small. We valued donors and contributors of all types, whether they were offering talent or financial support, from the very small gifts to the larger ones, and we've continued that path.
Notice that kind of unrelenting focus on helping folks in the community to understand what you do and to really see the successes that you're having, and that relates to fundraising, which I would say is one of the best practices that New Hope has. And we can get into that a little bit more. One thing that I do want to do in these series is I think it's really important to put a face on the affordable housing development, milieu or whatever, the work that goes on out there. There are, we talk about numbers of units and millions and billions of dollars put into these projects and governmental organizations and systems. But behind all of that, there are real people. And part of what I want to do is to help people get to know a little bit some of the great people who are doing this work. I mean, I hope that young people who are thinking about, where do I want to go in my career? Nobody really thinks about, I'm going to go into affordable housing development. But there are cool opportunities in this field. So I want them to learn from and get to know some of these wonderful people. So if we can take just a few minutes to talk a little bit about your home story.
Sure.
Everybody's home is so important and has such an impact on their lives. Can you tell me just a little bit about where you grew up and what kind of environment that was and how that influenced your life?
Sure. So I was born in Upper New York State, Neal, in Buffalo, to be exact, and lived in Niagara Falls for a while. But really, as quite a young child, my family moved to Corpus Christi. And I lived there until I moved to Houston. And probably the greatest impact, certainly the greatest impact on my life at that time, was my father died quite unexpectedly, just after I turned 16. So I learned that life can change like turning a page in a book.
Wow.
And nothing is ever really the same again, and your sense of security can slip away from you. So I think that has informed the way I look at those that we serve with Housing Plus services, because they each have a story of security and happiness slipping away from them and likely didn't have the safety net that I had.
I've seen that play out in the lives of so many of the people that we serve. One tragic event can just change the trajectory of their whole life. And so they need groups like New Hope to help.
Well, and if you don't have a safety net in your family, a robust safety net, you can not only run out of funds, you can run out of friends. And that's when you're more likely to wind up on the street.
Well, I'm grateful for the lessons that you've learned and the good work that you're doing. So tell me a little bit more about how you specifically got involved with New Hope. How did this start?
Oh, it was serendipity, and aren't so many stories that way. I was working in Houston. I was working for the Cullen family oil operating company, Quintana Petroleum, which now no longer exists. And during that time, I also did board work with Theater Under the Stars and with the YMCA. And of course, I was very familiar with the work of the Cullen Foundation at that time. And then for 4 years, I moved to South Carolina, and that was in the bust. You remember the oil bust back in the day that we thought could never happen to Houston, and all of a sudden, wow, it did.
Right.
So at that point, I moved to South Carolina, and as they say, and it's true, came back pretty well as quickly as I could after about 4 years. And I was looking for a job. And Beth Robertson at the Cullen Foundation was kind enough to sponsor my job search. So I could meet a lot of people really quickly, which was wonderful. I've always been very grateful to Beth for that sponsorship. And people kept telling me, you should talk to Christ Church Cathedral. You should talk to the Dean Walter Taylor. They have raised funds to seed an organization called New Hope Housing. And they were working to house the formerly unhoused, the homeless. And I kept hearing this, and I just wasn't interested, candidly, Neal. I had friends who worked with homelessness, who offered showers and meals and did on-the-ground work, and I admired it. It just didn't interest me. So finally, one day, the dean of the cathedral called me. I think people had been telling him I've been telling Joy, and she's not phoning you, Walter. So Walter phoned me and left a voicemail. And I listened to that voicemail, and I thought, I have no interest in this, but I have a lot of interest in meeting him. One of the most charming voicemails you can possibly imagine. Now, I learned a lesson there about leaving charming voicemails, okay? And he left one, and so I made an appointment, and it was a Friday, and it was chilly and raining, and I really didn't want to go. I was kind of tired. It was at the end of the day. And I'm a cradle Catholic, Neal, and the only reason I went to that appointment is I knew if I called and canceled it, that the priest would know I had lied. The Episcopal priest would know I had lied. So off I went to meet Walter. And he was just as charming in person as he had been on that call. And suddenly, 2 hours later, because it became very right-brained, we talked and talked and talked. I thought, this is the job I have to have. Yes, I was looking for a real job. Yes, I was looking for a full-time job. I had the medical center in mind, actually,
Right.
because that seemed, I'd been in corporate management, and that seemed a comfortable transition. Or the arts. I loved the ballet and live theater. Certainly was not interested in the mission that the cathedral was working on until I heard more about it from someone who knew how to articulate the beginning of something really important in this city, because this was first. In fact, it was the first studio efficiency apartments for the unhoused in the state of Texas.
Oh, I didn't realize that.
Indeed. And then I
Wow.
went and walked into one of those small units. And I thought, the reason for me to be really interested in this is a solution. It's important to offer showers. It's important to offer a meal. It's highly significant, but it isn't a solution. Housing is the solution to homelessness. Homelessness is a housing problem
Right.
at its root. So those cities that have the least affordable housing have the most homelessness.
Well, that's amazing that you had that vision so early on, because a lot of people for many years and decades felt that shelters are the answer to homelessness. And they are for some people in some situations, right? But we know now that Housing First is by far the best methodology for helping people who have experienced homelessness to get back into quality housing. And
It really is. And I would never then or today say that I'm visionary. But that was one moment in my life where I immediately saw, okay, this is it.
so you caught the vision.
Immediately.
That's really cool. It's super cool. So what was New Hope's mission in that very nascent stage?
Well, it was the same as it is today, except we've expanded on the mission. So the mission was always to offer housing and services to people with very limited incomes. And the first focus was on individuals who had been literally on the street or very close to the street.
Okay.
We have 1,001, to be absolutely precise, studio efficiency apartment homes for the formerly unhoused, and around 700 of those are for the formerly chronic homeless, which means someone who's lived on the street for a year or more. And what I would say to you about that is that if you and I, walked out of this studio today with what we have with us and our network and our experience, and we were on the street for a year, the very least we would have in terms of problems is post-traumatic stress. So everyone who lives in those 1,001 studio efficiency apartment homes, at the very least, comes to us with post-traumatic stress, and many with problems far more complex.
How does that stress manifest itself?
Well, it manifests itself in a need for us to assist people to understand how to live in a community.
Oh.
And we certainly aren't a social service program. Let me be very clear here. We're affordable housing with a plus, an important plus. But if you've been living on the street, you've been living in a very different kind of community.
Yeah.
And this is a community much like any other apartment complex in the city of Houston with the plus. But at its root, it's a multifamily apartment living environment. And so the noise you don't make for your neighbor, the respect you show for others, the control of anger that you need to exercise, the cleanliness is a different standard than it would be if you were on the sidewalk.
Sure. So, so you caught that vision, you came on board. I didn't realize that you were a part-time employee for several years.
That's right.
And so how did you ramp up to the organization becoming big enough, significant enough to bring you on full-time and to really get the ball rolling in terms of housing development?
Well, we probably should correct and say that I was paid part-time.
Right.
I'm not sure how part-time my work was, Neal. Some of it may have been quite full-time, but in any event, the wonderful thing about New Hope Housing, one of the wonderful things, is that the seed money for the organization was raised by the people of Christ Church Cathedral, which is the Episcopal Cathedral of the Diocese of Texas, Houston's first religious organization. It was formed when Texas was a republic.
Oh,
Sam Houston
wow.
was its president, and cowboys were running cattle up Texas Avenue, which was a dirt road. So they've been there a long time, and the people of the cathedral have a long, rich history of social outreach, successful, meaningful social outreach. So whereas we've never been under the control in any way of the Episcopal Church, we had a group of people with a track record for successful social outreach behind us.
Oh, wow.
And I've always believed that the moral authority of that church had a great deal to do with the foundation and the underpinnings of New Hope. So I didn't walk into nothing.
Right.
I walked into 40 studio efficiency apartment homes and a group of people who knew how to do a lot for others and who were dedicated to doing for others. And so I started to work, and the very first thing I started working on, I've always said it'll be the last thing I do when I close the door behind me, was working to build a brand, working to understand that affordable housing can be and should be in your neighborhood and in mine, and it can be and is an asset all over the city of Houston. And we operate at the nexus of art, architecture, and nature. Thank you for mentioning our distinctive look and feel of our housing. That's extraordinarily important to the people who live there, because we begin always thinking about the residents first. What offers them dignity? What offers them a sense of serenity, a feeling of being. We can't offer safety to anyone. There's no one can offer safety to anyone, but a feeling of being not constantly at risk.
Right.
Not constantly at risk is very important to what we do. And so we work on that every single day. I think the materials that we send, the work on our website, everything about the company, we strive that it is meticulous and that it displays for you the meticulous and dignified way that we work with the people who come to live with us.
And I think I've expressed to you before, one of the things that really impressed me about the housing developments that New Hope does, which I've been involved with in various capacities over the last 10 or 15 years, is the architectural excellence, the beauty. You receive all kinds of awards, deservedly so, for that. And it just occurred to me when I looked at, property after property that you developed and saw how beautiful they all were, that it just felt right. It resonated with me, because I think that, we build beautiful spaces. You look at city halls and libraries and universities and places of public gathering. we build them in a way to make them really beautiful because it does something to the human spirit. It lifts you, it inspires you, it helps you to feel good about yourself and your community. So, the HUD often refers to, there's a legal standard, safe and sanitary housing. And I noticed that your founding board chair, Mac Fowler, talked about safe and attractive places to live. And I think that is critically important. It sounds like it does help the residents to live in a place that is so beautiful that it says to them, you're valued. And also, it seems to me that, one of the biggest challenges you and I have faced in developing affordable housing over the last 20, 30 years is not my backyard NIMBY pressure virtually everywhere you go. But if you build something beautiful and you propose to do a new development in somebody's community and they freak out because they have preconceived ideas and fears that are often almost always inaccurate and misplaced, but they're real to the people in those neighborhoods that we go into. And you're able to take them to one of the former developments that you've done, and they see this beautiful apartment community. Does that help to allay their fears?
It's very helpful. And indeed, we have been recognized for our work internationally on several occasions, which is something that we can point to when we talk to a neighborhood. Now, does everyone come immediately on board? Of course they don't. And over time, I found more and more when you meet someone new, they'll say to me, all right, Joy, you don't need to talk about how beautiful the building is going to be and how meticulously it's going to be managed, because we already know that. And then there will be varying reasons that we don't want you here anyway.
Right.
And the reasons that are generally quoted are traffic and crime and the school overcrowding. Though you can point to study after study that shows that those reasons are without foundation. They're without validity. And so it is a process. We have been over time, mostly successful. What a blessing. Though there is one neighborhood that threw us out that we're not in yet.
Oh, really?
And that's correct. And they threw us out very loudly on our air, let me tell you. And even the mayor was trying to help us, the mayor at the time, and they let him know what they thought very loudly. But we still have our eye on that place. We think perhaps that neighborhood has come to realize the value of what we're doing. And haven't we as Americans come to realize the value of affordable housing? You never used to hear it mentioned on the national stage, and now you do.
Yeah.
And it's because Houston, like many other cities, 50% of the people in our city rent the place where they live. We are a city of renters. Actually, it's 51% to be more precise. And of those renters, so I think this is the way I think about it, Neal. I'm driving down the freeway. I think every other car is someone who rents the place that they live. And every fourth car is a Houstonian who's rent burdened.
And can you describe in plain English what rent burdened is for our listeners?
Yes, it means that you're paying more than 30% of your gross income in rent. Not net income, gross income.
Right.
And that doesn't include, let's think here about your utilities. Let's think about renter's insurance. You probably can't afford that and don't have it, which puts you at risk. It impacts your ability to ward off food insecurities for yourself and your family. It impacts the amount of money you have for health care to keep you and your children healthy. You certainly haven't the extra funding to go and receive a certificate to work in the medical center to do some training, for example, or to go to university. It impacts your entire life. And if you think about it, we all need an affordable place to live.
Right.
It's just that what's affordable to you or affordable to me or to some of your listeners is different, person to person. And it's really, you can't hope to have a single family home if you don't have an affordable place to rent so you can save money for a down payment.
The point you've just made is really, really critically important. I mean, it's just really fundamental. If you're paying over 30% of your gross income for housing. And then many people are severely rent burdened, which means you're paying more than 50% of their gross income for housing. How are you supposed to afford clothes and food and healthcare and transportation and any of the other sundry kind of normal, essential expenses that folks have? And I think I've observed the same thing that you mentioned, that we're finally seeing nationally a focus on housing affordability. And my theory on that, I think the reason that people are starting to focus on it, you and I have been seeing this problem in the renter population for a couple decades, and it getting worse and worse and worse. But now it's really hitting home ownership affordability and the gap between what you need to make to be able to afford a home and to be able to buy the homes that are available because the prices have skyrocketed has become way out of whack. So finally, I think the reason people are focusing on affordable housing now is because a lot of middle-class people's college-educated children can't afford to buy a home, and all of a sudden they woke up to this reality that, wow, we have a problem.
Well, and not only can they not afford to buy a home, they're moving back home, which isn't exactly what their parents had in mind.
Right.
Like, wait a second, there's a problem.
Right.
And it's my problem. It isn't just someone else's problem.
Yeah, one thing I learned that was illustrative of this to me when I was an assistant secretary at HUD, I traveled to Los Angeles 4 or 5 times because of the roughly 500,000 people experiencing homelessness in the United States at that time. 50,000 of them were in Los Angeles. So that's 1 in 10 were in LA. And I met with county officials and city officials and philanthropic groups and nonprofits and everybody. We had these big roundtable discussions on this. And somebody from LA County said to me, she said, you know what, Neal? In the 60s and 70s, you could move to LA to Southern California, and with a high school diploma, you could get a good job at an aerospace company, and you could afford a nice 2-bedroom little tract home and have 2 cars and live the American dream. She said, now, this was, I think, 2017 or 18, you need to make $90,000 to $100,000 to afford a modest 2-bedroom apartment, and not a nice 2-bedroom apartment in LA. And apartment occupancies were 97, 98%. So she just said, the difference is tremendous. And that resonated with me because I grew up in Southern California. My dad had a high school diploma. He worked in aerospace. We were not wealthy, but we lived in a modest home in San Juan Capistrano, then later San Clemente.
She had described your family to you.
Exactly. And those opportunities were there, but for the rising generation, they are not. And so we've got to do more to turn this around.
So Neal, let's talk a little bit about New Hope's work that is other than the prevention of homelessness, because I now see the studio efficiency apartments we have is not only resolving homelessness for the people on the street, but helping to prevent it. So the real key is to grab people before, lift them up before they hit the street and have a modest but lovely, affordable studio efficiency apartment. But let's talk about preventing homelessness for families, because we do have one property on Reed Road that's a part of Complete Communities there. We're there with Star of Hope. We're in the Cornerstone community. And that's 187 1, 2, and 3-bedroom apartments for formerly homeless families or families at severe risk. It's mostly single moms, but we have quite a group of single dads there as well. And then we are building increasingly some apartment homes for families with modest incomes who are not as severely at risk. But let's talk about a family with the wage earner, the main wage earner, primary wage earner, having an income of $33,000 a year or $44,000 a year. And some of the properties that we have under construction now, that's a demographic that's going to be interested in moving into those properties. And we're also developing for seniors. And as you know, with your work at HUD, senior is defined as 55 years of age and above, which always makes people raise their eyebrows or laugh nervously, one or the other. So we're developing some housing for seniors as well. People are being priced out of their historic neighborhoods.
Yes. Yeah, and the kinds of affordable housing communities you're developing will allow people to not be displaced due to gentrification. That's a really, really important anti-gentrification. Well, it's not anti-gentrification, but it's a solution to avoid the displacement that happens as gentrification occurs.
Well, and to keep our neighborhoods, and we're sitting right now in a rapidly gentrifying and gentrified neighborhood here in the east end of Houston, where we have our offices on Harrisburg atop one of our apartments, one of our buildings that serves the formerly homeless. And so we're seeing this all around us in the neighborhood where you and I live and work.
Right.
And it's important that we preserve the rich history and the diversity of neighborhoods, that the character of them doesn't completely change. This is a fascinating neighborhood that we're in, and there are many other fascinating neighborhoods in our city, and they need to be preserved. Improved, yes, progress is good, but not just to wipe the slate clean, which we've done or reputed to have done far too often in Houston.
So are you seeing people becoming more welcoming of New Hope housing communities because they're starting to recognize that gentrification and displacement is such a problem?
I think so, yes. I believe that's broadly being recognized today. And certainly you've done so much to assist us through the years and to bolster us, Neal. It's always been a source of great comfort to me.
Oh,
someone with your background, your work with the city, your work with HUD, your work with Harris County has always been available to offer advice and support. And you stand as a really fine example of hundreds of people who have reached out their hand to us to steady us as we work to build an organization that is an institution. We fully intend that New Hope Housing is around 100 years from now.
Well, you're very generous and kind, and I've just always been such a huge fan of what you do and just love the work that you do and the people that you serve. I just see the blessings that flow into their lives from becoming a part of the communities that you have. So you had incredible successes, but I know it has been hard won and hard fought and very difficult. And you've always just been a champion of affordable housing and just a really strong warrior fighting the good fight and knocking down hurdles. What are the biggest challenges that you've faced in building New Hope and doing the work that you're involved in?
Well, we already talked about one of the biggest challenges, which is not in my backyard, and
Right.
Also there's Note not over there either. So that's always a challenge, but really if you're candid about it, financing, money, is always the number one challenge. To put together what increasingly, oh my heavens, when we first built Canal, on the Canal Street apartments, right there across the street from Mama Ninfa's original Mexican restaurant, across the side street, and right near El Tiempo, right there in the East End. That building was $4.5 million, 127 studio efficiency apartment homes. And when I say it was $4.5 million, I mean fully furnished. Every apartment unit furnished, every office furnished, every telephone, every computer.
That's amazing.
And that was in 2005. today, the properties that we're building are $35 or $40 million. And that's what affordable housing costs today. And you know that, and I know that, because affordable housing isn't any less expensive to build than any other kind of housing.
Right.
And we, in fact, have long land use restriction agreements. They're 40, 45 years from the Texas Department of Housing and Community Affairs. They're 99 years with other governmental entities. So you'd best be building something that's going to hold up.
Right.
Because you own it and it's yours. And when you're in the affordable housing business the way we're in it, you're not looking to sell your property and make money. No, you're looking to serve as close to perpetuity as you're able to do so. Now, of course, after a certain length of time, buildings do need to be renovated, and maybe they need to come down at some point and be rebuilt. But you're rebuilding right there with that commitment to the Houston community, to the people who funded you, and to the people who look to you for housing. So the financing is increasingly complex. Interest rates down, low-income housing tax credit pricing down, interest rates up. Excuse me, I got ahead of myself.
Sure.
Tax credit pricing down.
Right.
And so there's an increasing gap that we work to serve. And one of the secrets of New Hope's success in building beautiful, award-winning housing that offers this kind of dignity and pride to the people who move in is the philanthropic community.
Right.
Helping us to fill that gap and to see to it that our buildings are to the highest standard of durability. And when you do that, the beauty follows. It really does. When you think about what's going to be durable, that tends to be a higher level product. Neal.
Well, and you marry that with beautiful design and kind of twin those principles, and you get the kind of cool communities that you've got.
There's always a bit of awkward tension there, because someone could say to me, well, now, Joy, if you just cut this a little here and cut that a little there, maybe you could build 2 more apartment homes in that building. And maybe you could. But we've always said, just a second here, the look and feel when you walk in that front door means a lot. Well, think about the way you feel when you walk in the front door of your home.
Yeah.
You think, I'm home.
Mm-hmm.
Here it is. This is my place. We think that means a lot to the people who live there. And no, we don't need to cut that little bit here and that little bit there. We need to offer more than people expect. When you come to one of our buildings, Neal, I want it to be more than you expected. I want it to be more than you believe someone else is going to deliver, and you're surprised we delivered it. That's what I want to see when you walk in.
That tension is, where people kind of think, well, okay, if we're going to be using government, philanthropic, charitable resources to develop housing for people of low and moderate income, well, there's this school of thought, well, we better not spend a dime more than absolutely necessary. But that kind of thinking led to a lot of the institutional box development of affordable housing that characterized some of public housing and a lot of affordable housing development in the, after the New Deal and through the 60s and 70s. And I think everybody has realized that was misguided.
Well, it led to precisely what we have to fight against now. We've already learned that lesson. We don't need to do it again.
Right. We've got these negative perceptions that every time you and I are involved in a new development, we're fighting those ghosts. And sometimes they're wildly inaccurate perceptions, but sometimes there's some substance to them.
Sure.
They're poorly, somebody grew up near a poorly designed apartment complex and there were problems there. So yeah, moving to a new type of vision and looking at making sure these developments are beautiful, I think is really important. So what are some of and you've talked about some of them, but can you think of a couple of best practices that New Hope has implemented, or even that you've just seen in the city of Houston or elsewhere, that would be helpful for others who are looking to what you're doing as a model?
Well, certainly a best practice is to involve as many different entities and stakeholders as you are able to in the mission of developing beautiful, durable housing plus services.
So how do you do that specifically? How have you done that?
Well, in the beginning and still today, I've done that when I feel I've reached a problem and I'm not sure of the answer, or I'm not sure the answer I've devised is the right one, to pick up the phone and to call people such as yourself and say, this is Joy Horak-Brown, this is what I'm trying to accomplish, this is why it's important, this is the problem I'm facing, could you help?
Oh, interesting.
Could you help? People do. Don't you like to be asked to help? Don't you like to be asked your opinion? I do.
Sure. I some might say I have a bit of an ego, and not the most humble guy in the world, but no, I think pretty much everybody feels good when somebody comes to them and asks for help or advice.
That's a best practice for sure.
I tell young lawyers, if you want to learn about the legal profession, go and talk to lawyers. They'll all be happy to talk about themselves. They're really busy, but they'll take time to talk about themselves and what they've learned, et cetera. So, yeah, no, I think that's
well, that's good advice, too. There you go. You and I are on the same track here. I also think it's very important to hire high-quality consultants, because if you're building a building, you certainly know this, it's a very complicated activity. So be sure that the people you're working with are the highest level of excellence, and remember to protect yourself against your own consultants, because it is at the end of the day your building, your responsibility. You're the one doing the compliance. You're the one facing the inspectors. It's yours. But work with the very best people you can attract to your work. I think that Campo and Camden Builders have built almost all of New Hope's properties, and they've been a fabulous partner. So that would be an example. Mm-hmm. We work with well-known, recognized architects, and can you afford to do that? Can someone else afford to do that? Yes, they can. It's a matter of looking at your capital stack and kind of working with those numbers in a way that's successful and allows you to deliver that product that is, once again, more than might be expected. And to always remember that when you're working with an affordable housing product, you need those services. And all of New Hope's properties are deeply affordable, Neal. That means 60% area median income and below. Think a family of four with an income of around $50,000.
Okay.
So it's very important to have those services. That's what allows people to remain stable in housing and to advance their lives.
Well, and you have done great work as a nonprofit entity developing all of these different apartment communities. And I've worked for most of my career with and for real estate developers. And the classic real estate developer is, a private sector man, usually,
yes.
Running around in his Mercedes or whatever and sashaying in and doing big development deals. You have done everything that those stereotypical developers do, but from a nonprofit seat, right, and position and in a mission-driven way, which is very different. But I think what sometimes people don't realize is to be a real estate developer, which you are, and you're a prolific and successful one, you're kind of the captain of the football team, or the quarterback, rather, mm-hmm. or the director of the movie. You've got all of these different professionals, and you and I are on these, video conferences and conference calls with 40 or 50 people who are all involved in doing one apartment complex deal. But somebody has got to organize all that and be the director, the quarterback, so to speak. How have you found that role, and what advice do you have to others, particularly nonprofit organizations? That a lot of nonprofits have the desire to go develop affordable housing, but many of them don't ever realize that dream. You are one of the top examples in the state of Texas, perhaps nationally, who's done that. So what do you have to say to give advice to other nonprofits who want to get to where you are?
Well, I think it's important. I know it's important to have an active and professional board of directors
Oh,
to back
interesting.
you. That's very important because that's your governing body. And it's really a nonprofit board that has the fiduciary responsibility, the major fiduciary responsibility. So that's always been, New Hope's been very fortunate in that regard through all of our 31 years of history. That's made a big difference.
But you've been fortunate in that because you've focused on that.
That's true.
You made it happen.
That's true. It's important to have the ability and to grow your ability to draw other people to what you're doing, to inspire others to come to the organization and to the leadership that the organization is offering. That's key.
And how have you been able to do that so successfully? Because you've got a very high-powered board of wonderful people. They're not only high-powered business people, they're just really good humans. And, I can tell you've really worked hard to bring that kind of high-quality group together.
Well, we started small, and I think if we're candid, we all realize that a success attracts successful people.
Right.
It's one thing because oh my heavens, bless the board members that I worked with when we had 40 studio efficiency apartment homes. Come on. And what might they have, did they really think there was much in the offing here? Always I think about and am grateful to them. And as well as to those who have come on board when we looked a little bit more like we were going to be able to accomplish something that was important. So I think that being successful in whatever way you can, however small it may be at the beginning, and for people to understand what that vision is and what that quality vision is something that I would advise anyone to think about really hard. Not to say, oh, gee, we can't do so much, we're so small, but to do whatever you're doing really well with excellence. And that will inspire and attract others to come and help you, because it takes, as you mentioned, a huge team to do this kind of work. There will be 40 people on a telephone call. One of the last housing developments that we just closed on and is about to break ground on, Avenue C in the East End, I recall that one of the entities, one of the parties sent out a thank you, congratulations message, and there were 63 people on the email.
Wow.
63 people. I thought, okay.
Yeah, so it takes a substantial village to build
Yes,
one
it does.
apartment
Yes, it
community.
does.
And people don't realize it. They don't understand the complexity of, I have friends who do pure market rate, private sector development, and that's hard enough. But when you're doing affordable development with low-income housing tax credits, federal funding, tax exemptions, philanthropic funding, private sector debt, it is so much more complicated. These deals are 5 to 10 times as complicated, and all of those federal funds come with their own strings attached that are complex and difficult to navigate. So,
well, and Neal, I would be remiss if I didn't mention to you that because we understand how there are small nonprofits who would like to develop affordable housing and who realize it's daunting, much more daunting than it was even 10, 15 years ago, that we do consult with other nonprofits and can indeed act as a developer. We're working with Houston Area Women's Center now as they're developing a new emergency shelter and transitional housing for women who are fleeing intimate violence. And we're working in Austin with an organization that's developing permanent supportive housing, offering them some consulting advice. So we are available.
Great. That's good to know that you're pushing out into that new area.
We are.
And I think that's a great way for other nonprofits to take advantage of the years of experience that you have, so that they can be mentored by you and learn from what you've done and then grow to do their own deals.
And we're learning all the time, too, by the way.
Yeah, and I think that humility is actually, people don't think of real estate developers and humility as being synonymous, right? Because you've got to be incredibly confident to go out and try to develop real estate. However, I've noticed that a quality of most of the successful developers that I know is that humility. They recognize that they can't possibly understand all of the moving pieces in a complex apartment community development. And so they've got to know how to find the right people. I worked with a really brilliant developer for many years, and he said to me, he was observing somebody in a government position, and he said, "You know what that person's problem is, Neal?" I said, "No, enlighten me." And he said, "She's afraid to hire anybody smarter than her."
Oh, well, that's a mistake.
Yeah, and he said, "You know what? I know my limitations, and the reason I've been successful is I hire people smarter than me that have strength sets and skill sets that I don't have, and that's how I've been successful." Insecure people will often not want to hire people smarter than them because they're afraid it's going to threaten them in some way. But to be a successful real estate developer, you've got to have the humility to recognize that you can't know it all, and the tenacity to still move forward with some of that fogginess. You never know exactly how you're going to get there, but you know if you put together the right team that in all likelihood you can succeed. So you've done that over and over, which is amazing. And it's great that you have others who are going to be having the opportunity to learn from you. So can you talk a little bit more specifically, if you would, about New Hope's specific role in reducing chronic homelessness in Houston, in terms of what you contributed? Because I know there was a time when permanent supportive housing became the favored methodology versus SROs. And I know that some people, myself and others, went to New Hope and said, "Hey, you're doing awesome work. We want you to do more. How do we help you to do more?" Can you talk a little bit about the role that you all played in reducing chronic homelessness in Houston?
Well, the role we played at its core was to offer housing. We have more permanent supportive housing and indeed supportive housing under management today than anyone else in the state of Texas. So we were fortunate that we were already on the path.
Right.
We simply needed to tweak what we were doing a bit. We needed to have more emphasis on services now that we were focused on having a larger percentage of individuals who were more complex in the challenges that they brought into the housing. The chronic homeless are more complex than someone who perhaps just was evicted last month, someone who's had that experience. So we needed to have more emphasis on services. And we also had to learn how to work with the Houston Housing Authority effectively, because the key to permanent supportive housing is twofold. Mm-hmm. One, it's to have a voucher, a housing authority voucher, because someone has to pay the rent in housing.
Right.
Free housing doesn't exist. Someone has to be supporting and subsidizing. So to work with a very complex system that is a housing authority, and then to work with the services, those were the two keys, and those were the things we needed to learn how to A, do, or B, do better.
Right.
In order to be successful with permanent supportive housing. And we stuck our toe very delicately into that. And we made sure, and you may recall because you were certainly at the City of Houston at that time, directing housing and community development, our insistence that our contracts with the city stated, if those services go away and those housing subsidies go away, the commitment to do permanent supportive housing goes with it.
Right.
And that is built into our contracts, because without that, it's not possible to do. It's impossible to do. Everyone has to do their share and be responsible for their share. And the role of the Houston Housing Authority cannot be underemphasized, nor can the role of the city and county working together with the housing authority in that nascent period when Houston was beginning to take a strong focus on resolving homelessness. That was critical.
Well,
and we were already in the stream. Remember that?
Yes.
We were
You were there.
in the stream.
You were there, and you were one of the only entities that had the mission sort of mindset to continue to produce affordable housing for people who had experienced homelessness, and the wherewithal to be able to do it in volume. And something that many people don't realize is that the economics of different kinds of affordable housing are very different. So if you're doing a low-income housing tax credit development for sort of workforce housing, which is not housing for people who've experienced homelessness recently, right? The economics are different. Those properties can make a little bit of money, right? They don't make a lot of money, but they can make a little bit of money. And I recall when I was the housing director, I did a little seminar. I got all these developers to come in, trying to persuade them to do permanent supportive housing. And 4 or 5 of them that I'd known for many years pulled me aside afterwards and said, "You know what, Neal? We love this idea. It's definitely needed, but we can't make any money doing this kind of development."
That was smart.
And so they said, sorry, we're not in that business. So about the only group we had in Houston when we had this tremendous success in reducing chronic homelessness was New Hope. There was Pastor Rudy in Temenos.
Absolutely.
And not much else. And you all were doing...
I'll tell you something.
Without you and your work, we would not have been able to substantially reduce chronic homelessness in Houston. So you were on the housing production side. And what I found was that it is so hard to do economically these permanent supportive housing developments that most developers just won't do them. One prominent developer I know who also has done with Cloudburst some really good affordable housing for the chronically homeless, pointed out to me that, whenever he signed off on one of these projects, he was putting his whole personal financial life on the line. And his wife would have nightmares, about the fact that if that project failed, they were going under because they did other market rate development. So the amount of risk that's there, people, I think, don't realize. And without the mission-driven emphasis that you had, I don't know that anyone else would have stepped, other than the couple of other actors stepped into that void. So, it was critically important.
Something I believe very firmly, and that you and I have talked about through the years, and we're talking about permanent supportive housing now, and that is that it can't carry debt.
Right.
And there are people who will show you their spreadsheet. They'll show you their pro forma. They'll say that they can carry debt if they have housing vouchers, and I will tell you that they are wrong. And they're going to find out they're wrong in 7 or 8 years. And we're not going to be wrong like that at New Hope Housing. And in recent years, we have not developed any additional permanent supportive housing.
Right.
We're doing some work with families. I talked to you earlier about the head of household with a $33,000 or $44,000 income. This is not exactly housing for the wealthy. But one of the reasons that we have not developed any additional permanent supportive housing is that gap has got to be filled. And the day that gap can be filled and Houston feels that New Hope needs to come and build some more permanent supportive housing, boy, we're ready. We're ready to do that. But you can't carry debt, Neal.
And virtually all of the low-income housing tax credit developments out there have debt.
Yes, they do.
Right. And people who aren't in real estate finance and in this niche that we're in don't realize that. So, yeah, what you play a critical role. We've just got a couple more minutes now. 2 things I would ask you in conclusion. One is you've talked about, I know on your website and some of your other materials I reviewed, the importance of linking housing with education. So if you could talk about that for just a moment, and then maybe end with describing some of the kinds of successes you've seen in the lives of people that you serve.
Linking housing with education, and may I also add health care to this conversation, strikes us as increasingly important. One of our properties on Reed has a small clinic in it that's operated by Healthcare for the Homeless, and it also has in its courtyard a Bezos Academy, a tuition-free preschool that operates on a lottery for people who live in the building and in the surrounding neighborhood and is fully funded by Jeff Bezos. It's our first of 3 Bezos Academies. So 2 of the properties we have under development right now, one for families and one for seniors, will have a Bezos Academy embedded in them. And we're talking about additional clinics and healthcare linkage. So it makes perfect sense if you think about the pillars of a successful life.
Years ago, I was working on an affordable housing development in a underserved community, and I went and spoke to some Houston Independent School District officials, and they had sort of a strike force team of administrators that would go and work with the most troubled schools in the district and try to help them turn around. And they pointed out something to me that just blew my mind. They said that because of housing instability amongst people renting in Houston, you often see this phenomenon in the lower level properties where they'll offer 1 free month of rent to try to bolster their occupancy, right? So they told me that they had many children in their district who, in this particular attendance zone, who would sometimes be in 3 different schools in one school year because their parents were very poor and were chasing 1 month's free rent. And I just remember thinking, my goodness, how does that child have a chance of succeeding if they're in 3 different schools in one school year?
That child has almost no chance of graduating high school.
Yeah, I mean, my parents moved once, or a couple times when I was a kid. I remember in 4th grade going into a new school in the middle of the semester, and it's still traumatic, when I think about how stressful and scary that was and difficult, but 3 different schools in 1 year and doing that over multiple years. So there is a link between one benefit of stable, affordable housing people don't often recognize is just the stability in your educational experience.
Well, I think so. And one of the properties that we're developing now is on Berry in North Houston. And it is, think of a large plot of land, no streets in the middle. And we're on one end with 181 2- and 3-bedroom apartments and a Bezos Academy going in. And in the center, there's a church that has a daycare. And at the other end of this tract is a KIPP Academy K through 12. So New Hope Housing and KIPP do believe that there are students at KIPP whose families would love to come literally down the block to live, and that there are families that are going to be moving in on Berry who are going to be signing their children up for KIPP Academy once they've finished at Bezos. So really a neighborhood. We're increasingly finding it important, not just that we're a good neighbor. We've always been a good neighbor. We've always participated in neighborhood watches and neighborhood meetings, but that we bring something more simply than the housing to a neighborhood. If we can bring a Bezos Academy with us, if we can bring a healthcare piece with us to a neighborhood, then we're bringing more of those factors, more of those building blocks for a healthy and successful life.
So you're just continuing to perfect what you're doing. You're making it better and better and better, which is amazing.
Always.
That's very cool. Any final thoughts?
Well, my final thought is to thank you, Neal, for having me here today and for all that you have done in your career for decades to stand shoulder to shoulder with those who need a bit of a lift in life. And that certainly has included helping me and helping New Hope Housing. And I think indeed that you're sometimes heard to say that you're not as humble as you might be. You said that a little earlier on. I would beg to disagree with that.
Well, you're very kind. I don't think it's my strong suit, but it really has been a joy to be involved in this effort. And I kind of started off like you, a little bit accidentally falling into this niche, into affordable housing, and then developing a passion for it.
Well, it's
so
a privilege, isn't it?
it is a real
to do
privilege.
this work.
Yeah, we're able to see blessings flow into people's lives and people's lives being stabilized and improved.
And one of the best things is to hear a story. We have a recent resident who was in school, and she was just about to need to drop out because she needed to have some additional income in order to pay her rent.
Oh.
And we have a LIFT program, Lives in Forward Transition, for single moms or indeed single dads. And we were able to put her into that program so that she has been able to stay in school because of the subsidies that program offers. And we can, I can drive by that building and I can know that that single mom lives there. And I know the struggle she was having and about to have to stop her education were it not for. And one of the wonderful things about what we can do is we can know those stories, you and I. But when someone says to you, Neal, why have you been working so hard this year? You can say, well, let's get in the car. Let's go look at it. It's a tangible thing that you're doing and I'm doing. And you can see the people walking around the building. You can see them getting in their cars and standing in the bus stop, and you know why you've been working so hard.
Well, that's the focus of what we do as people. One last question that's very important. How can people learn more about New Hope Housing and support the good work that you're doing?
Well, I would suggest they go to our website, www.newhopehousing.com, newhopehousing.com, or they could telephone the office, 713-222-0290, and ask to speak to me. I'd love to hear from them.
That's incredibly generous. Thank you so much for taking the time to spend with me. I'm really, really grateful for that. Value your friendship incredibly, and I'm just such an admirer of the great work that you're doing. And I'm sure that New Hope will be around in 100 years when we're all long gone, and hopefully some folks who might see this and get to see the kind of wonderful person you are and the cool experience that you've had in your career, they might say, hey, perhaps I should get into affordable housing and perpetuate this. So maybe there'll be a bunch of, Joy Horak-Brown proteges out there and doing really awesome work around the country. So thanks for being here.
Thank you, Neal.
Thank you.